My name is Elizabeth Betty Williams. Now, at 82, my heart is filled with stories I wish to tell. Do you know, my dear daughter? Life was never as beautiful as the flower fields they paint on screens. When I was a child, in the late 50s, the world was much harsher and more rigid. Sometimes I wonder, were all the joys and sorrows I experienced part of some invisible plan from the Almighty? But then I realized that, sometimes, the answer isn't as important as how we continue to walk forward. Because life, my daughter, is like those stubborn wildflowers that grow in barren land, small, fragile, but full of vitality. Today, I want to tell you the story of that little flower journey that wasn't easy, but beautiful in its own special way. It was 1955, and I had just turned 12. We lived in a small town in Ohio, one of those places where everybody knows everybody. Our house was attached to my father George Williams' general store. Every morning, the aroma of coffee that my mother Margaret made would blend with the smell of fresh bread coming from Mr. Alfred's bakery on the corner. Our house wasn't much a cramped living room with a dining table, 2 bedrooms, one for me and my brothers, another for my parents, and a small extension in the back where my paternal grandparents lived. And there was the kitchen, of course, which was my mother's and grandmother Martha's domain. Early each morning, before the sun was properly up, I'd already be out of bed making the beds and getting ready for school. Young people today wouldn't believe it, but back then, girls were born knowing their place was taking care of the home. After school and lunch, I'd work in the store. My brother Peter was a few years older than me and had already been working there since early morning. He had quit school to help our father, who often had to travel to neighboring towns to purchase products for the store. Peter was smart, could do calculations in his head better than anyone. He managed the cash register when Dad wasn't around, and I cleaned and organized the shelves. My younger brothers, Frank and Alex, didn't work in the store. Dad wouldn't let them near it. They were too mischievous and broke everything they touched. "Those two are nothing but trouble," Dad would grumble. So they stayed at home helping Mom with simple tasks instead. In the general store, it was always a rush. I can remember it like it was yesterday, the little bell that rang every time someone entered, and there I'd go in my worn apron to serve the customers. "Half a pound of sugar, please." "Give me a pack of Marlboro cigarettes." It was like that all day. What stands out most in my memory is the smell, a mixture of coffee, tobacco, bar soap, and the kerosene we sold for lamps, because electricity was a luxury few could afford. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still smell it. Funny how memory works, isn't it? But life wasn't all sunshine and roses at home. The rules were stricter than a wooden post. My father, a serious man, rarely spoke, but when he did, it was to give orders. "Elizabeth, fix that skirt. Peter, stop being lazy and go help in the store." We obeyed immediately. Back then, children didn't dare talk back to their parents. My poor mother was caught between a rock and a hard place. She wanted to protect us but couldn't go against my father. How many times did I swallow my tears, pretending everything was fine? It was sad, but that's how things worked back then. And grandmother Martha now, she was a tiny figure with a tongue sharper than a razor. She was always muttering in the corners, but deep down she had a soft heart. It was from her that I learned to make that cornbread I still bake for my grandchildren. Looking back now, I see that life was hard but simpler. We didn't have much, but we didn't know anything different. It was all about working, praying, and respecting your elders. In those days, I couldn't imagine what fate had in store for me. I was just a girl full of dreams, thinking the world ended at the town square. One thing I can't forget is the dinners at our house. Every single day, at 7 o'clock sharp, the entire family gathered around that old wooden table that creaked like a cranky old woman. It was sacred even if it was raining cats and dogs, nobody dared miss it. The table stood imposingly in our cramped living room, covered with a lace tablecloth that grandmother Martha had made. My father always sat at the head of the table, like a king on his throne. To his right was my mother, always with her head down, serving everyone without saying a word. My brothers and I squeezed together on the other side, trying not to make noise even with our breathing. My grandparents completed the picture, one on each side. Oh, if that table could talk the secrets it kept, the disapproving looks, the swallowed sighs, and the unspoken words it witnessed. Silence was rule number 1. At a proper family's table, you don't open your mouth to speak, only to eat, my father would say, and woe to anyone who disobeyed. The leather belt hanging behind the kitchen door was always at hand, a constant reminder of what could happen. During those times I'd wonder, are all families like this? Did God intend things to be this way? Because if it was meant to be a blessing, sometimes it felt more like a trial. Oh, my dear, if there's one thing nobody prepared me for, it was the changes in my body. Around the age of 12, I started noticing things were different. It was as if my own body had become a stranger to me. First came the breasts. They suddenly started growing, and I didn't know what to do. I'd hide behind loose blouses, dying of embarrassment. Grandmother Martha was the one who noticed. One day, she came close to me and whispered, "Girl, it's time for you to wear a bra." Heavens above, I was so embarrassed. But there was no way around it. Off I went with Grandmother Martha to buy my first bras at Mrs. Helen's store. I tried them on hidden behind a screen, feeling like I was doing something forbidden. Those garments were torturous. They itched like straw and squeezed like barrel hoops. I felt all tied up. But what could I do? Grandmother Martha would never stop repeating, "Girl, if you don't wear one, your breasts will sag like those of Native American women." I didn't even know what she was referring to exactly, but the idea terrified me, so I swallowed my discomfort and resigned myself to this new prison. Then came menstruation. Lord Jesus, what a fright. One beautiful day, I woke up with blood on my nightgown. I thought I was dying. I ran crying to my mother, thinking I had some terrible disease. My poor mother was more awkward than I was. She explained, all flustered, that it was normal, that every woman went through it, but no details. Everything was very vague. "That's just how it is, daughter. You're a young lady now." Come to think of it, I was lucky. Many girls my age didn't even get that basic explanation. Some mothers simply gave their daughters some rags and told them to figure it out themselves. Back then, topics related to the body and menstruation were considered taboo. Nobody dared talk about it openly. At school, it was all whispers. Girls would gather during recess to exchange information, always afraid someone might hear. Has yours started yet? How do you keep from staining your clothes? There was Sandra, who was Mrs. Marlene's daughter. This Mrs. Marlene was different from anything we knew in her house. They seemed to talk about everything openly. Sandra would come full of news, telling us what she learned at home. Mercy. We'd be sitting there with our jaws dropped. Everyone wanted to be Sandra's friend. Truth be told, I wanted to be Sandra herself. She knew things, had a mother who explained everything. I can't deny I was terribly envious of that girl me in half the world. And the boys? They were terrible. Always teasing, making jokes. If a girl was in a bad mood, they'd say she was having those days. We'd die of embarrassment but couldn't say anything. I remember once having terrible cramps at school. I stayed hunched over at my desk, sweating cold, afraid to stand up in case I'd stained my skirt. Mrs. Rose, the teacher, asked if I was feeling ill. I nearly died of embarrassment and could only shake my head, saying it was nothing. The worst thing was that we knew nothing about our own bodies. Everything was a mystery. Everything was sinful. If someone asked how babies were born, the answer was always the same. The stork brings them. Can you imagine? And we believed it, of course. Once, I sneaked a book from the library that talked about the human body. My goodness, it felt like I was reading something forbidden. With each page I turned, I'd look around to make sure no one was watching. That's how it was back then. We discovered things little by little, always in fear, always in hiding. It was like walking in the dark, feeling your way, stumbling, not really knowing what was happening. And the dreams? I started having strange dreams that left me all confused. I'd wake up sweating, my heart pounding, not really understanding what had happened. I was terrified to tell anyone, thinking it was a sin. It was during this time that I started becoming interested in boys, but it was all very innocent. A glance at Sunday Mass, a shy smile in the town square, nothing more than that. If my father had suspected anything, God forbid. Looking back now, I see how unprepared we were. How many problems could have been avoided if we'd had better education, decent guidance. But as they say, we can't change the past. What we can do is learn from it and try to do better with the next generations. And so, in this climate of mystery and discovery, I grew up. Around this same time, I also became more interested in books. Not that I didn't like reading before, but now it was different. It was as if books could tell me all those secrets that adults hid from us. At school, there was a new literature teacher, Mr. Jack. That man was a well of knowledge. He spoke in a way that made us travel without leaving our desks. He was the one who introduced me to the great writers. I remember as if it were yesterday when he read to the class an excerpt from The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. My face turned red as a tomato, but I couldn't stop listening. From then on, I became a bookworm. I'd spend hours hidden among the library shelves, devouring book after book. Mrs. Judith, the librarian, would often say, "Be careful not to go crazy from reading too much." But I didn't care. One day, I found a book hidden at the back of a shelf. It was a cheesy romance novel, quite silly really, but it had some scenes. Good heavens! I took it home hidden, wrapped in my notebook. At night, I'd read under the covers with a little flashlight. If my father had found out, all hell would have broken loose, especially since I'd sneaked the batteries from the store. And it wasn't just books I dreamed about. I started having these crazy ideas about studying, about becoming a teacher. Imagine a small-town girl wanting such things. My father nearly had a fit when I mentioned it. "A woman's place is at home, taking care of her husband and children," he said. I was devastated, but I didn't give up on the dream. In the store, while serving customers, I'd imagine what it would be like if I could go to the big city and study. I'd see all those well-dressed women passing by on the street and think, one day I'll be like that. It was foolishness, I knew, but dreaming didn't cost anything, right? Sometimes, when I was alone, I'd take one of my mother's old dresses and look at myself in the cracked bedroom mirror. I'd imagine myself all important, teaching in a fancy school. Then I'd quickly put everything away, afraid someone might see. The worst was when Sunday came around. Off we'd all go to Sunday Mass, me in my modest dress with a rosary in hand. Father Joseph was always saying that a proper young lady couldn't have these worldly thoughts, that we had to be obedient and modest. I'd be gnawing at myself inside, thinking I was committing some sin just by dreaming of a different life. But not everything was sadness. I had Lucy, my best friend. We'd meet secretly by the old apple tree at the back of her yard. We'd spend hours talking, sharing confidences. It was to her that I confided my dream of becoming a teacher. She looked at me with those bright eyes and said, "One day you'll make it, Elizabeth. You'll see. You're tenacious." And so the days passed, between hidden dreams and harsh realities. I was growing, transforming. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking about the future, wondering what my life would be like in a few years. Would I achieve my dreams? Or would I end up like so many other girls in town, married, young, and full of children? Ah, my dear, now we come to the part that changed my life forever. It was 1958, and I had just turned 15. Johnny Parker appeared in town like a whirlwind, turning everything upside down. Johnny was an apprentice mechanic who had come to work at Mr. Gerald's garage. Tall, dark-haired, with a smile that lit up the entire street. One glance at him was all it took for me to become completely smitten. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was the day of the church fair. I was there helping at one of the booths when he arrived. Our eyes met, and that was it. I felt a flutter in my stomach that I'd never felt before. From then on, it was all sighs. I'd invent any excuse to pass by the garage. "I'm going to buy bread. I need to deliver this message." Everything was an excuse to get a glimpse of him, always covered in grease, working under some old car. One day, I gathered my courage and went to talk to him. I nearly died of embarrassment. I was all flustered, barely able to form a sentence, but Johnny was a sweetheart. He treated me with such gentleness that I fell even harder for him. We started meeting in secret. It was always quick, a glance at Mass, a brief conversation in the town square. If my father had suspected, it would have been the end of the world. But we didn't care about the danger. It was all so new, so exciting. Our first kiss was on a Sunday afternoon. I had pretended I was going to visit Lucy, but I actually went to meet Johnny behind the statue of the Virgin Mary. I was so nervous when he came close to me, I thought I would faint. The smell of grease mixed with the cheap cologne he wore sent shivers all over me. From then on, we'd meet whenever possible. It was difficult, we had to dodge my father's vigilance and the town gossips. But we found a way. A little note here, a quick meeting there. Johnny was different from the other boys in town. He listened to me, you know. When I talked about my dreams of studying, of being somebody in life, he didn't laugh. On the contrary, he encouraged me. "You're smart, Elizabeth. You'll go far," he'd say. But it wasn't all roses. Sometimes I'd get scared. What if someone found out? What if Johnny got tired of me? After all, I was just a small-town girl, and he had already seen the world. Once, we were almost caught kissing secretly in the town square bandstand. We ran like criminals, and afterward, we laughed so hard our stomachs hurt. But the scare was real. Time passed, and the relationship grew more serious. We started talking about telling my parents, about making it all official. I was scared but happy. I thought I had found the man of my life. Little did I know that fate had other plans, that this beautiful love would turn into a storm in my life. But back then, I was blind. I only saw the good side of things, the dreams, the promises of eternal love. It was in this climate of dreams and promises that we ended up giving in to temptation. On a hot July afternoon, in the old abandoned shed behind the garage, we gave ourselves to each other. It was awkward, a bit painful, but special to me. I thought I was sealing my destiny, that I would be happy forever, if only I had known what was coming. But as they say, you never forget your first love, even with all the pain that came afterward. My dear, now the story gets heavier. It was right after that afternoon in the shed that things started to change. At first, I didn't notice. I thought it was just tiredness, you know? After all, I worked all day in the store, helped at home, studied at night. But then came the delay. A month passed, and still no menstruation. I was terrified, but I tried to convince myself it was just stress. Maybe it's because of the weather change, I'd tell myself, trying to believe it. By this time, I knew that if you didn't menstruate, it might be a sign that you were pregnant. I'd learned that from reading books. 2 weeks later, the morning sickness started. Every day, around 10 a.m., I'd get dizzy, nauseated. I tried to hide it as best I could, but my mother started to suspect. "Girl, are you eating properly?" she'd ask, looking at me strangely. It was Lucy who opened my eyes. One afternoon, while we were talking in our usual secret spot, she dropped the bombshell. "Don't you think you might be pregnant?" I felt as if the ground had opened beneath my feet. I spent the night awake, praying, begging that it wasn't true. But deep down, I knew. My body felt different. My breasts hurt. It was a reality I couldn't run from. Johnny and I arranged to meet at the same shed where it had all happened. When I told him, he turned white as a sheet. At first, he said nothing. Then he started talking nonsense that we could take care of it, that he knew about some herbs that would solve the problem. I was horrified. It had never crossed my mind to do such a thing. It was a sin. It was a crime. But Johnny insisted. He said he was too young, that he wasn't ready to be a father, that it would ruin his future. I don't know what future he was talking about, since every time we were together, it was only me filling his ear with my plans and dreams. I left there devastated. The man I thought would support me, who would solve everything, had the audacity to suggest that. I wanted nothing more to do with him. Time kept passing, and it became harder and harder to hide. My mother was already looking at me suspiciously. My clothes were getting tight. One day, I couldn't take it anymore. I went to look for Johnny at the garage, determined to resolve the situation. But when I got there, I got the biggest shock. Mr. Gerald told me that Johnny had found a job in a bigger city. I stood there, unable to believe what I was hearing. Johnny had run away, left me alone to face all of this. It was as if the world had collapsed on my head. I went back home like a lost soul. I cried all night, hidden under the covers so no one would hear. I felt betrayed, abandoned, afraid of what would happen. It was around this time that I started to notice the looks, the neighbors whispering when I passed by, Father Joseph staring oddly at me during Sunday Mass. It seemed like the whole world knew my secret except my family. I knew I couldn't hide it much longer. My belly was starting to show, no matter how much I tried to disguise it with loose clothes. It was just a matter of time until everything came out. Every night I prayed for strength, for a miracle. Maybe if Johnny came back. But deep down, I knew the worst was yet to come, that when the truth came out, my life would never be the same again. My dear, the day I feared most finally arrived. It was a Sunday night after Mass. The whole family was gathered for dinner as usual. I could barely swallow my food, I was so nervous. My belly was already showing, even with the loosest dress I had. Suddenly, I felt that strong nausea. I got up quickly from the table, but I didn't make it to the bathroom. I threw up right there in front of everyone. A heavy silence fell over the room. My father looked at me in a way I'll never forget. "Elizabeth," he said, in a voice that seemed to come from the depths of the earth, "are you with child?" I couldn't answer. I just lowered my head and started crying. It was as if someone had thrown a bucket of cold water over everyone. My mother let out a muffled cry. Grandmother turned as white as paper. My father stood up from the table. I thought he was going to hit me, but what he did was worse. He looked at me with a contempt that hurt more than any slap. I went to my room to gather my things. I could hear my father's shouts in the living room, cursing, saying I'd dragged the family name through the mud. When my brother Peter saw me packing my things, he tried to defend me but received a smack to the ear that left the mark of Father's 5 fingers on his face. I left home that very night with a bundle of clothes under my arm and a broken heart. My mother hugged me secretly and gave me some money she had saved. "God protect you, my daughter," she said before closing the door. Two stood there in the street, not knowing where to go. In that moment of desperation, I remembered Lucy, my best friend. She was the only person I could trust now. I spent the night trembling from cold and fear. In the morning, I went to knock on Lucy's door. Her mother, Mrs. Sarah Wilson, looked at me with pity. She let me stay for a few days, hidden in the little room in the back, which was like a dusty storage room. It was truly hidden. Her husband couldn't know under any circumstances because he was friends with my father. The hardest part was the night. I couldn't turn on any light for fear he'd find out. The little room didn't have a bathroom, so they left me a bucket that I emptied in the morning. Only God knows how difficult that time was. But I knew I couldn't stay there forever. The belly would grow, people would talk. I had to leave, try my luck elsewhere. It was the hardest time of my life, pregnant, alone, with nowhere to go. Sometimes I thought about going back, begging my father to take me back, but I knew it was useless. For him, I had died that night. My dear, when I think about that time, I wonder how many other girls went through the same thing. How many had to leave everything behind, face the world alone because of a mistake, a moment of weakness. If you're watching this and know someone who's been through something similar, or if you yourself have faced such a difficult situation, share with us in the comments. Sometimes sharing our story helps others not feel so alone. It was then that God put an angel in my path. Mrs. Sarah Wilson, Lucy's mother, knew a lady in the city who needed a maid. Without thinking twice, I packed my little bundle and took the first bus to Cleveland, Ohio. Arriving in Cleveland was a shock. I'd never seen so many cars, so much noise, so many people. I felt like a grain of sand in the middle of that big world. I stood at the bus station for the longest time, not knowing where to go, afraid of getting lost. Finally, I made it to Mrs. Eleanor Thompson's house. It was an old 2-story house in a nice neighborhood. Mrs. Eleanor Thompson was an elderly widow who lived alone. When she saw me, all skinny and frightened, she looked at me in a way that reminded me of my grandmother. "Girl," she said, "you need a plate of food and a good night's sleep." That night, lying in a small bed in the maid's room, I cried everything I had to cry from fear, from homesickness, from relief at having found a place to stay. The first days were full of hard work. I tried my best at every task, afraid of disappointing Mrs. Eleanor Thompson and losing the opportunity she had given me. I'd wake up early, before the sun rose, and only go to sleep after making sure everything was impeccable, the rice always perfectly cooked, the clothes ironed without a wrinkle, the floor so shiny you could see your reflection in it. I remembered everything my mother and grandmother had taught me about taking care of a house. Mrs. Eleanor Thompson was impressed. "Girl," she'd say, "where did you learn to cook like this?" She was a very kind lady. She'd praise the windows I cleaned, and for me, this routine was good because it helped me forget a little about what had happened to me. My belly was growing, and with it, my fear of the future. What would I do with a baby? How would I support a child? Sometimes at night, I'd talk to my belly, apologizing for not being able to give my child a better life. Mrs. Eleanor Thompson knew about my situation, of course. One day, she sat with me in the kitchen and said, "Elizabeth, having a child isn't the end of the world, it's the beginning of a new one." Those words gave me strength to move forward. I started saving every penny I earned. I bought some baby clothes at a church bazaar, some cloth diapers. Who misses? Eleanor Thompson gave me a crib that was lying unused in a room, saying it had been her son's. Time passed, and I was getting used to life in the big city. I learned to ride the streetcar, to shop at the market, even to use the public telephone. It was all so different from my small town. But not everything was perfect. There were days when the homesickness was so strong it hurt. I'd look up at the sky, wondering if my mother was looking at the same stars, thinking of me. Did they miss me? Would they ever forgive me? You know, my dear, back then I thought my life was over, that all my dreams had gone down the drain. But today I see it was just the beginning of a new journey. Have you ever been in a situation where you thought it was the end, but it turned out to be a new beginning? Tell us in the comments. Days went by, and my belly kept growing. Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, bless her, took care of me as if I were her own daughter. She even took me to the doctor a few times, something I'd never done in my life. When the day of the birth came, it was a rush. The pain started in the early morning, and silly me, I thought it was just a minor discomfort, but Mrs. Eleanor quickly realized what it was. In an instant, she had called a taxi, and off we went to the hospital. My son was born on a Sunday morning. When the doctor placed that red, crying little bundle in my arms, I felt an emotion that's impossible to explain. It was love, fear, joy, all mixed together. I looked at that little face and thought, that's it. Now it's just the two of us, against the world. I named him Michael. I chose this name because I'd read in books that it meant, who is like God? And to me, that baby was a true miracle, a divine gift amidst all the difficulty I was going through. The first months were difficult nights without sleep, worry about every little thing. Is he breathing right? Is he hungry? Is he sick? But Mrs. Eleanor Thompson was my guardian angel, always there to help and calm me. First-time mothers are all like this, she'd say. I continued working, now with little Mike by my side. While I cleaned the house, he would stay in his crib, and from time to time, I'd stop to check on him, just to make sure everything was all right. He nursed so well, he was gaining weight. I took him to get vaccinated at the health clinic. With the money I had saved, I bought a baby carriage, and whenever I went out nearby, he would come along. Time passed, and Mike grew. In the blink of an eye, he was crawling around the house, exploring every corner. When he took his first steps, my heart nearly exploded with joy. Each of his achievements was a celebration for me and Mrs. Eleanor Thompson. Sometimes, watching him sleep so peacefully, my thoughts would wander far away. I'd think about Johnny, his father. Had he gone on with his life as if nothing had happened? Would he ever want to know his son? These thoughts left me with a lump in my throat, but I'd quickly shake my head to chase them away. But you know what kept me up at night? That blessed staircase. As I've told you, Mrs. Eleanor Thompson's house was a 2-story house, and little Mike became fascinated with that staircase. It was as if there was a magnet pulling him toward it. I lived in panic, imagining him tumbling down and breaking every bone. I decided I needed to do something. I talked to Mrs. Eleanor about putting Mike in daycare. It was close to the house, but it took forever for a spot to open up. In the meantime, Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, the loving person that she was, let me improvise a little gate at the bottom of the stairs. What a relief it was. I made the gate with some loose boards I found in the yard and some hinges. I put the latch where he couldn't see it. It wasn't pretty, but it did the job. Mike would get so frustrated, clinging to the bars, trying to climb, but at least I could breathe a little easier. Even so, I didn't take my eyes off him for a second. Children are clever little creatures, you know. Every now and then, I'd catch him trying to find a way to get under or over that gate. But that's how we learn to be mothers, isn't it? And each day was a new adventure with my little one. But life doesn't stop, and I had to think about the future. I started to save every penny I could. I wanted to give my son a better life. I wanted him to have the opportunities I didn't have. It was around this time that Mrs. Eleanor Thompson gave me the idea to go back to school. "Elizabeth," she said, "you're too smart to spend your whole life just cleaning houses." At first, I thought it was crazy. How would I work, take care of a child, and still study? But the idea grew in my mind. I started studying at night after Mike was asleep. Mrs. Eleanor would keep an eye on him for me. It was hard. There were days when I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open. But I knew it was the only way to give my son a better future. During this time, Mrs. Eleanor Thompson's house became busier. One March afternoon, she called me, all excited. "Elizabeth, my middle son is coming to spend a week here with his family. Can you help me get everything ready?" Of course I said yes. After all, I owed Mrs. Eleanor Thompson so much that I would do anything to make her happy. I spent the weekend cleaning the house from top to bottom, arranging the guest rooms, shopping, all while taking care of Mike, who was almost 2 years old by then and had endless energy. On Sunday afternoon, they arrived. It was Robert Thompson, Mrs. Eleanor Thompson's son, his wife Sally, and their 2 children, Lauren, 15, and Paul, 19. Paul had the same name as my brother, which made me a bit awkward at first. After all, I was the maid of the house. But they were so friendly that I soon felt at ease. Paul, in particular, caught my attention. Tall, with brown eyes, with a quiet but gentle manner. He was an engineering student at college, all focused on his studies. When our eyes met for the first time, I felt a flutter in my stomach that I hadn't felt in a long time. Of course, I looked away, not daring to have any expectations. Days passed, and the family settled in. Mike loved having other people around, especially Lauren, who played with him as if he were a little brother. Paul, whenever he could, would join in the games, making Mike laugh with his silly antics. One afternoon, while I was studying in the kitchen after putting Mike to bed, Paul appeared. "May I sit with you?" he asked. I felt awkward after all. He was family and I was the maid. But he insisted, and soon we were side by side, with him helping me with some arithmetic problems I was having difficulty with. "So, Elizabeth," he began, "Grandmother told me a bit of your story. You're very brave, you know." I felt my cheeks burn. I wasn't used to compliments, much less from such a handsome and educated young man. Gradually, we became closer. Paul would always find a way to help me with my studies, whether in the kitchen, in the yard, or when I was giving Mike a bath. He would explain the subjects to me, but with much respect. I never felt any ulterior motive from him, just a genuine desire to help. It was during one of these study afternoons that Sally, Robert's wife, joined us in the kitchen. While Paul was explaining some biology concepts to me, she watched us with a distant look, as if remembering something. Suddenly, she decided to share something that left me open-mouthed. "You know, Elizabeth," she said, "seeing you two like this reminds me a lot of myself and Robert." I was surprised by the comparison and a bit embarrassed, but she continued, "I also got pregnant young, before marriage. Oh, my dear." That conversation with Sally was one of those moments you never forget. I was sitting there, all awkward, when she started talking. My jaw nearly hit the floor. I never imagined that this elegant, composed woman had gone through something similar to me. She told me she had also gotten pregnant before marriage, but the difference was that when she told Robert, Paul's father, He was happy. Can you imagine? He went straight to her parents' house to ask for her hand in marriage. Paul, who was right there beside us, even confirmed it. Yes, Mom was pregnant with me. Goodness, I wasn't used to people being so direct. I was burning with embarrassment at that unexpected conversation. But then Sally came closer, took my hand, and said with eyes full of understanding, "Elizabeth, your mistake wasn't loving. It was loving someone who didn't deserve you. What happened wasn't your fault." When she said this, those words touched me in a way I can't explain. It was as if an enormous weight had been lifted from my shoulders. And just like that, I began to cry. But it wasn't just crying, it was sobbing. It was releasing everything. Sally hugged me, and I clung to her. You know what's funny? I always thought the blame was entirely mine. After all, Johnny never forced me to do anything. If I were to think about it, I was the one always running after him. But in that moment, I realized that sometimes we blame and judge ourselves too much. That day was a turning point for me. It was as if I had taken an enormous weight off my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I felt light, you understand? Oh, my dear, life is funny. Sometimes we need an outsider to see things in a different way. Paul, who had been quiet listening to the conversation, said, "That's why I admire Elizabeth so much, Mom. She faced everything alone and is still here fighting to give her son a better future." In that moment, looking at Paul and Sally, I felt immense gratitude not just for the help with my studies, but for making me feel that I wasn't worth less because of my past, that my story, no matter how difficult it had been, didn't define me. From then on, my relationship with Robert's family changed. I wasn't just Mrs. Eleanor Thompson's maid anymore. I was someone they respected and admired, and that, more than anything else, gave me strength to keep fighting for my dreams. After the family left, life returned to normal, but something had changed. Every week, a letter would arrive from Paul. At first, they were letters talking about his engineering studies, telling me about the projects he was working on, and always sending some math exercises to help me, on the condition that I answer and return the letter. Oh, my dear, you should have seen the joy when the letter arrived. Mrs. Eleanor Thompson would be all pleased, handing me the envelopes. "Look, Elizabeth, a letter from Paul." Little Mike already recognized the blue envelope that Paul always used. In one of the letters, he sent a technical drawing he had made, explaining how a bridge worked. I was impressed with it all, with the calculations, with the details. Paul had a way of explaining things that made them seem easy, you know? Sally also started sending messages along with her son's letters. It was as if suddenly I had gained a new family, but not everything was rosy. There were days when I'd wonder if I wasn't dreaming too much. After all, Paul was an educated young man from a good family with a future ahead of him, and I was a maid with a child, studying at night to finish junior high. One night, after putting Mike to bed, I sat in the kitchen to read Paul's most recent letter. Mrs. Eleanor Thompson appeared and caught me crying over the letter. "What's this, girl?" she asked. "Oh, Mrs. Eleanor," I said. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm not being foolish again, if I'm not deluding myself." She already knew that although Paul and I had declared ourselves to each other, something serious was happening there. She sat beside me and took my hand. "Elizabeth, Paul is not like Johnny. My grandson is a man of character. If he's writing, it's because he truly cares. He's not playing with you." The letters became different over time. It wasn't just about studies anymore. Paul began to tell more about his life, about the dreams he had, and I also began to open up more, to tell about my fears, my hopes. In one of the letters, he wrote something I never forgot. "Elizabeth, you are the bravest woman I know. Not just anyone can start over from nothing and still think about studying, about growing. You inspire me to be better." When I read that, it was different from what I felt for Johnny. It wasn't that blind passion that makes you lose your mind. It was a more mature feeling. It was beautiful in a different way, you know? My dear, Paul's letters continued to arrive for months, becoming more and more frequent, more and more, how can I say, more full of affection. He always asked about Mike, sent drawings for him to color. In one of these letters, he mentioned he was thinking about coming to spend his vacation at his grandmother's house. I was so nervous, so afraid. It's different to exchange letters and to see someone in person, isn't it? In a letter, you think, choose the words, write several drafts, crumple them up, and throw them away if they don't turn out well. But face-to-face is another story. And wouldn't you know, he really did come. He arrived one July afternoon, alone this time. Mike, who was already 3 years old, ran to him as soon as he saw him. It seemed like he had known him all his life. Paul picked him up, and the two of them had an animated conversation about the drawings he had sent that week. Our routine changed completely. Every morning, Paul would already be there, waiting for us to take Mike to daycare. Then he'd accompany me to work, always talking, making me laugh. At night, he would insist on walking me to school. Mrs. Eleanor Thompson would be all pleased seeing us together. From time to time, she'd appear, as if by chance, with a coffee, a cake, finding excuses to stay there watching, talking with us. It was on one of those nights, on the way back from school, that it happened. We were walking back, talking about 1,000 things, laughing carefree. I remember this day well. It had just stopped raining, and there was that pleasant smell of wet earth. At a darker corner, he held my hand. Before I knew it, it was happening. We kissed right there under a streetlight. It was a sweet and enveloping kiss, different from anything I had ever felt before. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it would jump out of my chest. After the kiss, he took my hand and placed it on his heart. I realized it was beating just like mine, but I didn't show it. I thought, he'll think I'm forward. But then, my dear, fear hit me hard. I jumped away from him. In my head, all I could think about was what had happened with Johnny, the fear of giving myself again, of ending up pregnant again. I started trembling, because you know how an I-zone thing leads to another, and before you know it, it's too late. Paul noticed immediately. "Calm down," he said, holding my hands. "I'm not Johnny. I'm not here to play with you. I respect you. I respect Mike. We'll go at your pace." At that moment, crying there in the street, I told him everything, my fears, how I was afraid of giving myself, of trusting again, that I couldn't let my guard down. Do you know what he did? He hugged me. That's all. He just stood there hugging me, letting me cry as much as I needed to. Then he took me home quietly, holding my hand. From then on, we began a relationship without rush, without pressure. Paul respected my time, my limits. It was disturbing to be next to him and not. My desire was to grab him, you know. Good heavens, my child, what a struggle it was. Especially when we were alone, like on the way back from school. Paul there, so close, with that good smell, that affectionate manner. There was one night when I almost gave in. We were on the porch after everyone had gone to sleep. Paul hugged me from behind and started kissing my neck. Goodness, I felt my knees go weak. But then that fear came back again, that weight on my conscience. I ran away from him, went inside. Poor Paul would get embarrassed. Sometimes I could tell that he too was fighting against desire, but he never forced anything, never complained. He would just say, "I'll wait for you to be ready, Elizabeth. There's no rush." It was such a different feeling from what I had for Johnny. With Johnny, it was just a flash in the pan, that silly girl thing. With Paul, it was deeper, more true, and perhaps that's why it was so scary. And for those of you listening, have you ever had to hold your heart with a tight rein even when you wanted to give in? You know, some people don't like to talk about these subjects. They get all, "Don't touch me, don't approach me." But I think it's important to talk about it. It must be because in my childhood everything was so rigid, so full of rules and prohibitions, that I ended up learning the hard way. That's why today, now that I'm old, I like to share these stories. Who knows, maybe it helps someone not to go through what I went through. The years passed like this, between letters and visits during vacations. Paul graduated in engineering and soon got a good job in Chicago. By this time, we were already engaged. Meanwhile, I managed to finish my studies and even did a technical accounting course. It was Sally who gave me the idea. "Elizabeth," she said, You have a knack for numbers, why don't you do a technical course? And wouldn't you know, she was right. I graduated with the best grades in the class. The wedding was simple but beautiful, in the town church, with Mike proudly carrying the rings. When we got married, my boy was 6 years old. Paul insisted that it be close to Mrs. Eleanor Thompson. Grandmother is like a second mother to you, he would say. It has to be here. Incidentally, this church was the same one where his parents had gotten married. After the wedding. Oh, my dear, I don't even know how to tell this part. We finally had our night of love. Oh, glory. After so much time holding back, respecting, we couldn't wait any longer. It was all so beautiful, so special. Paul was always affectionate, treating me like a queen. It was a different love, mature, built on respect and waiting. It was worth every moment of anxiety. Afterward, we went to live in Chicago, near Paul's parents and sister. The hardest thing was leaving Mrs. Eleanor Thompson. Good heavens, how it hurt. She cried so much when we said goodbye. And Mike, poor thing, clung to her legs and wouldn't let go for anything. Grandma, I don't want to go, he cried. She, with that special way of hers, hugged him tight. To her, he was truly a grandson from the heart, since she had welcomed us when he was still in my belly. But you know what she said to us? Go with God, my children. This is my place, where I raised my children, where I lived with my husband. I'm not moving from here. This was because we had tried to convince her to come with us. In the first weeks in Chicago, Mike cried every night from missing her. He wanted to know when he would see his grandma again. Paul, the loving person he was, understood the situation. Every month, we would take the bus to visit her. It was such a joy. Mike would go running as soon as the bus stopped. It was beautiful to see. With time, more children came. First Claire, who was the spitting image of her father. Then Benjamin, Ben, who took after me more, and Mrs. Eleanor Thompson was always there, firm and strong in her house, receiving everyone with that same affection. Her other grandchildren also visited her often. It became the meeting point for the whole family. It was a celebration when everyone got together. You know, after all that studying, I ended up never working outside the home. Paul earned so well as an engineer that we could live comfortably. We bought a nice apartment in the center, a good car. Our life became wonderful. The best thing was that now we could visit Mrs. Eleanor Thompson more frequently and even take her for outings. But let me tell you something funny. Paul decided to teach me to drive. Good Lord, what an adventure. I loved being at the wheel. I felt like the queen of the world. But when it came time to get my license, mercy, I failed twice. Can you believe it? I knew how to do everything properly, but when the test came, I would get so nervous. Good heavens, it was a stomach ache so bad that only Jesus could help. Paul would nearly die laughing. Tell me something, my dear. Do you have a driver's license, or are you one of those people who are afraid to drive? Well, now I'm going to tell you something very surprising that happened to me. After so much time in Chicago, I began to feel a different kind of homesickness for my town. Something told me I needed to go back there, to see my family again, even without knowing how I would be received. Mike was already 15 years old, the same age I was when I left home. It was as if it were a sign, you know. One day, I gathered my courage and asked Paul to take me there. He was worried at first, afraid of seeing me suffer again. Elizabeth, are you sure? What if they don't treat you well? He asked, hugging me. But after I explained that I needed to try, that it was important for me to close this cycle, he understood and agreed to accompany me. Paul was always like this, protective but letting me make my own decisions. I also talked with my mother-in-law, whom I valued greatly. She, with that maternal wisdom, told me that I should indeed go back, that this restless feeling was God speaking to me, sending me there. And for those of you listening, if you believe that God speaks to us through our hearts, through our intuition, write in the comments. God knows the right time to heal wounds. I decided to go alone first, without the children. It was a Sunday afternoon, around 4 o'clock, when we arrived in my town. It seemed like time had stood still, the same town square, the same church, even the bell ringing like in the old days. But so many things had changed. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest when I stopped in front of my parents' house. Paul held my hand, giving me strength. The general store was closed. The gate was ajar, as always. We entered, and I knocked on the door. "Good heavens," my mother answered. She stood there, looking at me as if she were seeing a ghost. Suddenly, she let out a cry and threw herself into my arms, sobbing. My father, who had been napping in the living room, came to see what all the shouting was about. When he saw me, his knees wobbled. I had never seen my father cry, but that day it was a cry of sobs. Between tears and hugs, we went inside. My mother, still trembling, went to make coffee. "Sit here, my daughter. You came at the right time. I was just making some coffee," she said as she dried her tears on her apron. My father couldn't take his eyes off me, as if I might disappear if he blinked. We sat there at the kitchen table. My mother served the coffee, her hands still trembling with emotion. Paul, so polite, thanked her. It was then that I properly introduced Paul. "Dad, Mom, this is my husband, Paul." My father shook his hand firmly. "The same name as my son?" he said. Thank you for taking care of my girl." People, honestly, that didn't seem like my father. It didn't seem real. It was too good to be true. Until the nightmare began. Dad started to tell me everything that had happened after I left. After a sip of coffee to gather courage, he began to speak. "My daughter," he said, his voice breaking, "after you left, this house became a hell. Your mother cried day and night. I pretended not to see, so as not to show weakness. But inside, I was in pieces." He paused a moment, took a deep breath, his hands clutching the cup tightly. "Peter, your brother, my God, that boy never forgave me. Every day he would throw it in my face. Dad was unfair. Elizabeth needed support, not condemnation. And you know what? He was right." My mother, who until then had been quiet in a corner, began to sob. "Your brother Peter, he's gone, my daughter. It's been 5 years. A truck accident on the road. He left behind a little girl, Maria Rita, just like you when you were little." At that moment, I felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. Peter? My brother Peter? It couldn't be. My knees went weak, and if it hadn't been for the chair, I would have fallen. "No, Mom, not Peter," was all I managed to say before collapsing in convulsive tears. My mother came running, hugged me tightly, and we stayed there, the two of us crying together. It was such a deep pain. He was so young. When he died, he was only 27 years old. The guilt of not having been there, of not having said goodbye, of not having thanked him for trying to defend me of this came to the surface at once. Paul also came to hug me. My father continued. He was crying too. "Your grandparents are gone too, Elizabeth. Grandfather George died shortly after you left. They said it was from heartbreak. Grandmother Martha lasted a few more years, but she's gone too. Your other brothers are all married, scattered around." He paused, looked me in the eyes. "You know, daughter, every Sunday after Mass, your mother would tidy your room, change the sheets, dust, as if you might come back at any moment. And I would go there at night when I thought no one was watching. I'd take that first communion photo of yours and cry over it." Paul held my hand under the table, giving me strength. That simple gesture said everything. He was there with me, supporting me in this difficult moment. My father noticed. He was clearly emotional. "God is so good, daughter. He gave me this chance to ask for your forgiveness," he said. "I was proud. I was too cruel to you. I let myself be influenced by what others would think, what they would say, and I lost precious years with my only daughter." He paused a moment, as if seeking courage to continue. "You know, daughter, that night when I discovered you were pregnant, the first thing I thought about was my father, how he had always been strict with me, how he taught me that a man has to be tough, has to show authority." His voice failed. I wanted so badly to prove to my father that I had learned his lesson. I wanted him to see that I knew how to be as firm as he was. And in this foolishness of wanting to please my father, I ended up doing the same thing that he certainly would have done if he had been in my place. At that moment, I couldn't take it anymore. I got up and hugged my father. He cried like a child, asking forgiveness, saying he loved me. My mother joined the hug, and we stayed there, the three of us, trying to recover lost time. My father pulled away a bit from the hug and asked, "Daughter, and the child you were carrying in your womb? What happened? Did you have it?" It was my turn to tell my story. I took a deep breath and began. "Yes, Dad. I had a boy, Michael. He turned 15 last month, the same age I was when I left here. God put angels in my path." I told them everything from the beginning. When I mentioned that Mrs. Sarah Wilson, Lucy's mother, had hidden me in the little room in the back and then helped me go to Cleveland, my parents were open-mouthed. "So that's where you stayed?" my mother interrupted with wide eyes. "I went to their house days after you left to ask if they knew anything about you." Mrs. Sarah Wilson looked me in the eyes and said she hadn't seen you in a long time. To this day, I remember her words. I was impressed with their loyalty. Poor things, they protected me as best they could. Even with my mother there suffering, they kept the secret to protect me. Mom said that years later, she learned they had moved to another city. When I told them about the children, my mother let out a sigh of joy. 3 grandchildren, my God in heaven. Dad couldn't speak. He just cried and smiled at the same time. We arranged that the following week I would return with the children. But before leaving for Chicago, there was something I needed to do. We went to the house where my brother Peter had lived with his family. It was a beautiful house, inherited from his widow's parents. When we arrived, I saw a little girl running around. It was Maria Rita. She looked exactly like me when I was small. I couldn't contain myself. I knelt down and embraced her, and she looked at me with curiosity. Back in Chicago, Michael already knew my whole story. I had told him everything many years ago. He had always thought he would never meet his biological grandparents. For him, his grandmother was Mrs. Eleanor Thompson. So when I told him I had seen my parents and that they wanted to meet him, he was surprised but very excited. It was a beautiful meeting. When my father saw Michael walking in, he turned as white as paper. Michael was very tall. My father was surprised that he had grown so much. He was handsome. Claire and Ben also came along, of course. My mother didn't know who to hug first. It was all joy. With time, we began to live as a real family. During an extended holiday, we took my parents to meet Mrs. Eleanor Thompson in Cleveland, Ohio. Good heavens! When she saw my father coming through the gate, she nearly had a fit. Even without knowing him, smart as she was, she realized it was him and my mother. After all, I had never brought anyone strange there. Not even my friend Sit was only from the gate outward. At first, she was serious, with that stern face that only she knew how to make, but afterward, it was all tears. You know, by the end of the day, the two of them were sitting on the porch, drinking coffee and chatting as if they were old acquaintances. Time is indeed a medicine for the soul. Later, we went for a walk to show them the neighborhood. We passed by the daycare where Mike used to stay when he was little, his little school. My poor mother was amazed with all those streets full of trees. "Look at all this abundance, my daughter," she wouldn't stop saying. There were oak trees and hickory trees everywhere, and mercy, some were so laden with acorns and nuts that we had to change our path for fear of being hit on the head. The nuts were so big that when they fell, they made little dents in the dirt ground. The people on the street were always complaining, but no one had the courage to have them cut down. They had to watch out for the kids. As for the cherry trees, there were so many that we would walk along eating from them like birds. After this, I looked for my other brothers. Frank had moved to Denver, Colorado. He was doing well, owned a pharmacy. Alex went to Atlanta, Georgia. When they found out I had returned, they came rushing to see me. Good Lord, it was such a cry fest. Each one brought their family. Frank with his 3 children. Alex arrived with his wife, and the twins, Marina and Melissa. This story of twins in Helena's family, his wife, was a crazy thing. Just imagine, her mother was a twin, she had twin sisters, and it seems the gift continued. Later, Marina had twin boys, continuing the tradition, while Melissa had only one girl. Today, at 83, I look back and see how life takes its turns. Time passed so quickly. I have 7 wonderful grandchildren, 3 from Michael, 2 from Claire, and 2 more from Ben. Ben, my youngest, surprised me when he said he had received an offer to work in the United States. He went to live in California with Vera Lucia and their children. There, my great-grandchildren were born, Tommy and Charlotte, children of Gabriel and his wife, and Dylan and Luna, children of Isabella and her husband. They never came to the U.S., but Paul and I managed to visit them 3 times. What an adventure it was! I found myself crossing the world. When I first moved to America, I didn't speak a word of English, only, "I love you." I was lost in that world of foreigners, but over the decades I learned to speak English well enough. Thankfully, Paul, always the studious one, understood everything. To this day, he makes a point of practicing English with our great-grandchildren via computer. 4 great-grandchildren is very few, but times are different. The generation has changed a lot. Nowadays, there are so many good contraceptive methods, so much information. Only those who want to have children have them, and when they want to. Very different from my time, when we hardly knew how things worked. Paul, my companion through all these hours, remains by my side. It's been 61 years together. Today, after having traveled the long road of life, I realize that the greatest challenges of my life have become my greatest teachers. When I was kicked out of my home, carrying an unborn child, I thought my life was over. But God sent angels to be by my side, those who were there for me in my hardest times, those who loved me unconditionally. What I have learned is that there is no mistake too big to overcome, no wound too deep to heal. Our choices do not define our entire lives, but how we respond to those choices truly makes the difference. Dear friends, don't let the past define you. Seek out those who truly love and accept you for who you are. Learn to forgive, not only others, but also yourself. Life is not about what happens to you, but how you live with it. If this little story has touched you, please subscribe to our channel to hear more stories of resilience and love from older people like me. Every life has a precious lesson worth sharing.